Before we set sail into this epic video of discovery and downfall, make sure you subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the untold stories of history's greatest triumphs and tragedies. Now, let us journey into the life of the man who found the New World and lost everything. The ocean was black that night, an endless abyss stretching beyond sight, beyond sanity. The sailors whispered of sea monsters with jaws wide enough to swallow a ship whole, of storms that would tear flesh from bone, of falling off the very edge of the world. For them, the horizon was not just a line, it was a warning. Yet one man stood at the bow of the Santa Maria, his eyes fixed on that forbidden horizon: Christopher Columbus. His name was not yet legend. He was not the Admiral of the ocean sea, nor the man who would shake the foundations of kingdoms. He was, in this moment, a dreamer bordering on madness, a man who believed the impossible. That land lay not to the east, but across the uncharted west. The crew despised him for it. Every creak of timber sounded like a death knell, every empty sunrise that revealed nothing. But more water chipped away at their sanity. Their faith wavered. Their stomachs churned with salted rations and fear. Some sharpened knives in secret, muttering that a dead captain was better than a doomed voyage. But Columbus, he refused despair. He clutched his maps, parchment stained with sweat, torn from endless debates with kings and scholars who laughed him out of their courts. "The world is round," they mocked, "but you will drown before you prove it." Only Isabella of Castile had gambled on him, and now her crown, her fortune, her very name, were tied to the fate of this man's obsession. On the 32nd day at sea, mutiny boiled. The men surrounded him on deck, faces twisted in fury, demanding he turn back. They shouted of wives left waiting, children who would never see their fathers again, and gold that would never be found. Columbus listened. Then, with a fire in his voice that cut through the stormy night, he made his vow: "Give me 3 more days. If no land rises from these waters, we turn back. On my life, I swear it." 3 days. That was all he had bought himself. 3 days to prove the world wrong, or to vanish into legend as a madman who dragged an empire into the abyss. And then, on the dawn of the 2nd day, a cry split the silence. "Tierra, land!" The sailors rushed to the rails. On the horizon, like a ghost from myth, a dark line broke the sea's endless blue. Palms swayed in the distance, glimmering in the sunlight. The New World had been found. But what awaited Columbus was not salvation nor glory. It was the beginning of betrayal, ruin, and the slow unraveling of everything he thought he had won. The surf crashed against the sand with a rhythm unlike anything the weary sailors had ever known. For weeks their world had been salt water and despair. Now before them stretched an island of dazzling green, lush palms, birds with feathers like spilled jewels, and the sweet perfume of flowers drifting on the wind. The men fell to their knees, kissing the sand, tears streaking down weathered faces. They had not only cheated death, they had proven the impossible. Columbus, chest heaving with pride, raised the royal banner of Castile and Aragon. He claimed the land in the name of Spain, declaring it San Salvador. Yet as the flag snapped in the breeze, a shadow of unease lingered in his heart. For they were not alone. Figures emerged from the trees, tan-skinned, curious, cautious. They carried no steel, no armor, only spears and ornaments of gold. Their smiles were gentle, their gestures welcoming. The Taíno people saw these pale strangers as something between guests and gods. To Columbus, however, they were a riddle and an opportunity. He studied their ornaments with greedy eyes. Gold, even in small glimmers, it was enough to ignite a fever in his veins. He thought of Isabella, of Ferdinand, of the promises he had made in the halls of Granada. Spices, riches, new lands to rival those of Portugal. His future, his honor depended on this treasure. The first exchanges were peaceful. The Taíno offered fruits, parrots, and carved idols. The Spaniards gave glass beads, bells, and trinkets. The islanders marveled, laughter bright in their voices. But beneath the laughter, Columbus calculated. These people were gentle, trusting, unarmed. In his diary that night, he wrote words that would shape centuries of conquest. "They will make fine servants. With 50 men we could subjugate them all." Still, for his weary crew, paradise seemed a reward. Fresh water quenched cracked lips. Fish roasted over fire replaced maggoty ship's biscuits. The jungle sang them to sleep with cicadas instead of creaking timbers. For a moment, it seemed as if heaven had been found at the edge of the world. But heaven never lasts. As days turned into weeks, whispers grew among the sailors. They wanted proof, gold, not words. Trinkets were not enough to silence the hunger in their eyes. They pressed their admiral for answers, their trust thinner than parchment. Some accused him of trickery, of leading them into illusions. And then came the first clash. A misunderstanding, a gesture mistaken, a word misheard, and a Taíno youth lay bleeding in the sand. The air thickened with fear. Friendships turned fragile. Paradise trembled. Columbus stood on the shore, staring at the crimson waves licking the body. He had crossed the sea to find glory. Instead, he had planted the first seed of violence in this untouched world. What began as a discovery would soon become a conquest. And conquest always demands a price. The harbor of Pallas was a thunder of bells and voices. The day the battered ships returned. Crowds surged along the docks, eyes wide with awe as the survivors staggered ashore. They were gaunt, sunburned, their clothes ragged from storms and salt. But they carried proof that no scholar could deny. Parrots squawked on their shoulders. Strange fruits filled their baskets. And gold, small fragments but gold nonetheless, glittered in the sun. Columbus himself rode at the head of a grand procession to Barcelona, where Ferdinand and Isabella awaited him. The streets were lined with peasants and nobles alike, all straining for a glimpse of the man who had defied the edge of the world. "The Admiral of the ocean sea," they whispered. For a moment, Columbus felt destiny itself crown him. When he entered the royal court, he fell to his knees before the sovereigns, presenting gifts from the New World, ornaments, woven cloth, and most importantly, the first islanders brought back across the ocean. The Taíno captives gazed around in confusion, their eyes reflecting torches and gold, their very presence a living testament to discovery. Isabella leaned forward, her face illuminated with both wonder and calculation. Ferdinand, shrewder and colder, said little, though his eyes glittered when he touched the gold trinkets. For Spain, hemmed in by rivals, Portugal to the east, France at its border, this was no mere adventure. This was a weapon. The court erupted in celebration. Nobles spoke of endless riches. Priests whispered of souls ripe for conversion. Merchants dreamed of routes that would rival Venice and Genoa. And for Columbus, the dream swelled beyond imagination. He was promised titles, wealth, and the right to govern the lands he discovered. The Genoese weaver's son had risen to stand among kings. Yet beneath the applause, murmurs lingered. Some scholars sneered that he had not reached Asia at all. Others accused him of exaggeration, of bringing back trinkets instead of treasure. Behind velvet curtains, rivals sharpened their daggers with words, preparing to tear him down the moment he faltered. Even among his own sailors, resentment simmered. Many claimed Columbus had hogged the glory, that he had sworn them riches yet returned with baubles. Some threatened lawsuits. Others whispered to the crown, eager to poison royal ears with doubts. Columbus ignored it. He was already planning the next voyage, larger, grander, with ships enough to bend the new world to Spain's will. Yet in the dark hours of night, he could not silence one truth. He had seen paradise, and already the shadow of conquest had crept across it. For triumph in Spain was fleeting, and soon the dream would curdle into something far darker. The drums of Seville thundered as 17 ships pushed off from the docks, their sails swelling with ambition. No longer was Columbus a desperate dreamer begging for favor. He was now the Admiral of a royal armada, his banner kissed by the winds of empire. Thousands lined the shore to cheer him, dazzled by the sight. Over 1,000 men, armed with steel and cannon, not sailors this time, but settlers, soldiers, priests, and fortune-seekers. It was not exploration anymore. It was conquest. Columbus strode the deck with pride, his velvet cloak snapping in the wind. He imagined cathedrals rising on distant shores, gold pouring into Spain, and his name carved forever into history. Yet below deck, whispers thickened like smoke. Many among the crew had not come to serve God or crown. They had come for wealth, and they would tolerate nothing less. Weeks later, when the fleet sighted the Caribbean once more, the men erupted in cheers. The island seemed to shimmer with promise. Bright waters lapped against white sands. Parrots darted like sparks across the sky. The Admiral felt vindicated. This was proof enough that destiny itself had blessed his voyage. But paradise greeted them with silence. When Columbus searched for the small garrison he had left behind on Hispaniola, he found only ruins. The fort he had built smoldered in charred remains, and the bodies of his men lay scattered in shallow graves. The Taíno, once friendly, had turned hostile. Rumors spread of Spaniards who had stolen, who had forced, who had burned. The islanders had risen, and blood had already stained the soil. The men who had cheered now glared at their admiral. Some demanded vengeance, others gold. Columbus tried to steady them, promising riches deeper inland. He ordered new settlements to be built, new missions to be raised, new searches for gold. But the truth gnawed at him. There was little to be found, only dust and fragments. Tensions boiled. Spanish steel clashed with Taíno spears. Fields burned, villages emptied, and once gentle hosts became desperate enemies. Columbus watched his dream warp into chaos. He had wanted a paradise for Spain, but instead, he commanded a land drowning in violence. Even within his own camp, rebellion stirred. Officers accused him of mismanagement. Soldiers muttered that he hoarded wealth. Priests complained of his cruelty. His titles weighed heavy, his authority fraying with every sunrise. One night, as Columbus stood by the shore, watching flames lick the horizon, he realized what he had unleashed. The New World was no longer a vision of peace, it was a furnace, consuming everything within it. And already, back in Spain, rivals were whispering of his failures. Hispaniola was no longer a paradise. It was a kingdom of ash. Villages once filled with laughter now stood silent, their huts burned, their people enslaved or hiding in the mountains. The settlers who had come with grand visions of wealth found only toil, sickness and hunger. And at the center of it all stood Christopher Columbus, not as a hero, but as a governor bound in chains of his own making. At first, he tried to rule with the iron authority of an admiral. He demanded obedience from soldiers, settlers, and Taíno alike. He distributed land, forced labor, and decrees in the name of the crown. Yet every command sparked resentment. The Spaniards cursed his name, claiming he withheld treasure. The Taíno resisted his rule, vanishing into forests or rising in small revolts that left blood on both sides. Gold, always gold, was the root of the fury. Columbus had promised rivers of it to the crown, mountains of it to the settlers. But the truth was harsh. The veins were thin, the streams meager. His men dug in vain, their backs breaking under the sun, their tempers snapping. "Where is the gold, Admiral?" they demanded. "Where is the paradise you promised?" Columbus felt the pressure of Spain crushing him across the sea. Letters from the court arrived with veiled warnings. The crown expected riches, not excuses. His rivals at home sharpened their accusations, painting him as a liar, a tyrant, a foreigner unworthy of trust. Within his colony, rebellion bloomed. Spaniards abandoned their posts, forming rogue bands that raided both natives and fellow settlers. Priests condemned the cruelty they witnessed. Even Columbus's own brothers, left in charge during his absences, ruled with arrogance that fanned hatred further. The Taíno, once generous hosts, now fought back with desperation. Armed with spears and courage, they launched night raids, their cries echoing through the forests. Columbus struck back with steel and fire. Entire villages were cut down. Survivors were chained, marched to the coast, and packed onto ships bound for Spain, human proof of his conquest, yet also proof of his cruelty. But the ships carried more than captives. They carried rumors, tales of misrule, of settlers starving while Columbus hoarded food, of brutal punishments that shocked even hardened soldiers. By the time the stories reached Castile, the admiral's reputation was unraveling. Columbus, pacing in his chambers beneath the sweltering island night, clutched his charts like lifelines. He had found the New World, yet it was slipping from his grasp. Power, glory, honor, all corroding under betrayal and rage. And on the horizon, sails approached. Spanish sails, not to honor him, but to investigate him. The sails appeared like ghosts on the horizon, Spanish ships, not bearing supplies or settlers, but judgment. Word had reached the Catholic monarchs. The admiral's paradise was bleeding. And now the crown was sending men not to honor Christopher Columbus, but to weigh his sins. The envoy, Juan de Aguado, stepped ashore with the authority of the monarchs burning in his gaze. He did not kneel, he did not bow, he demanded. "By order of their majesties, I come to inspect the conduct of the Admiral of the Ocean Sea." To Columbus, the words sliced deeper than any blade. For years, he had imagined his name carved beside saints and kings. Now he stood accused like a petty thief. Settlers crowded to Aguado's side, their voices spilling grievances. The Admiral had starved them, misled them, punished them with lash and rope. Priests whispered of cruelty, of greed, of a paradise transformed into hell. Columbus tried to defend himself. He pointed to the fortresses, the fields, the ships he had sent back laden with proof of discovery. He reminded them that without him, Spain would have no foothold in this new world. But his voice, once filled with conviction, now trembled. For every word he spoke, another voice rose against him. Even the Taíno captives, their eyes hollow with suffering, stood as silent witnesses to his failures. Columbus saw it in their faces, not awe, not fear, but pity. When Aguado returned to Spain with his reports, the tide turned. The Admiral who had once paraded through Barcelona like Caesar now found the court's smiles colder, its praise thinner. Ferdinand listened with narrowed eyes. Isabella hesitated, torn between her faith in the man who had opened the seas and the damning chorus of complaints. But Columbus was not yet broken. With desperation burning in his chest, he begged for another chance, another voyage, another opportunity to prove himself. He painted visions of continents yet undiscovered, of rivers running with gold, of souls waiting to be claimed for Christendom, and astonishingly the monarchs relented. Whether out of lingering faith or a gambler's hope, they gave him ships once more. But this time the trust was poisoned. His enemies in court sharpened their knives, his rivals whispered of replacing him, and his every step was watched by eyes ready to condemn. As Columbus sailed again, his fleet smaller, his authority weaker, a truth haunted him like a shadow on the waves. He had once been the man who defied the world. Now he was the man the world longed to see fall. The Caribbean sun was merciless, baking the settlement of Hispaniola until it stank of rot and despair. Columbus had returned on his third voyage, with promises once again of new lands, new riches, new salvation for Spain. But instead he found a colony tearing itself apart. The settlers no longer looked to him as their admiral. They looked at him with hunger in their eyes, with knives in their hands. Fields lay abandoned. Gold was scarce, and whispers carried on the wind rebellion. Some settlers deserted, turning the island into their own kingdom of chaos. Others accused Columbus and his brothers of tyranny. "He hoards food while we starve," they spat. "He promised us treasure, and we dig only dust." The Taíno, driven to the edge of annihilation, fought back with fire and blade. Skirmishes turned into massacres. Paradise was now a graveyard of broken oaths. Columbus tried to hold order with iron. He lashed deserters, imprisoned rebels, hanged thieves in the public square. But the more he tightened his grip, the more his authority slipped through his fingers. Even his brothers Bartolomeo and Diego, ruling with arrogance in his name, fanned the flames of hatred. The cries of misery crossed the ocean. And in Spain, the monarchs finally acted. They sent a new governor, Francisco de Bobadilla, bearing a sealed warrant and the full authority of crown and church. When Bobadilla stepped ashore, he did not greet Columbus as a fellow servant of Spain. He demanded his surrender. Settlers rushed to him with accusations, torture, corruption, cruelty. Bobadilla listened, nodding gravely, and then did what no one had dared. He placed Christopher Columbus, Admiral of the Ocean Sea, in chains. The moment burned like acid into Columbus's soul. Iron shackles bit into his wrists as soldiers marched him through the streets he had built. Once he had walked into Barcelona like a conquering Caesar. Now he was paraded like a criminal, the jeers of settlers stabbing at his pride. As the ship carried him back across the Atlantic, he sat in silence, the rhythm of waves mocking him. He had defied the edge of the world, found lands unknown to Europe, and won crowns and titles. Yet here he sat, bound like a common thief, his dream turned to rust around his wrists. He swore he would not take the chains off. Not until the king and queen themselves removed them. Let them see, he told himself bitterly. Let them see what they had done to the man who gave them a new world. But in Spain, the court was already turning away. The hero had become an inconvenience. The chains were struck from his wrists at last. But the scars remained, etched not only into his skin but into his soul. Columbus stood again before Ferdinand and Isabella, no longer the radiant Admiral who had once paraded through Barcelona, but a man weathered, broken, desperate. He pleaded with the monarchs to restore his honor, his governorship, his dream. They listened, but their patience was gone. The crown stripped him of his titles, denied him the right to rule, and placed their colonies in the hands of other men. Columbus was free, yes, but free only to fade into obscurity. Yet still he clung to hope. There was one last voyage left in him. He promised not riches this time, but discovery, that beyond the islands, beyond the seas he had charted, lay the passage to Asia, the true prize of empire. Against all doubts, the crown relented. One final chance. In 1502, Columbus set sail once more. 4 weather-beaten caravels carried him, not with fanfare but with quiet suspicion. His name no longer commanded awe. Many among his crew did not follow him out of loyalty, but out of necessity. The seas themselves seemed to conspire against him. Storms hammered the ships with relentless fury, splitting masts, swallowing sails. Lightning carved the sky as if heaven itself condemned him. At times the caravels crawled half-sunken, their crews bailing water with bare hands, their prayers drowned by the roar of the ocean. When land appeared, salvation proved cruel. The new governor in Hispaniola, Nicolas de Ovando, refused him entry to safe harbor. "The admiral has no authority here," came the cold reply. Columbus watched from the waves as the colony he had birthed shut its gates in his face. Days later, a hurricane struck, destroying fleets in the very harbor where he had been denied refuge. His warnings had gone unheeded. He pressed onward, battered but unyielding, along the coasts of Central America. There whispers of gold flickered again, rivers with flecks of it, chiefs adorned with ornaments. But everywhere he turned, the land resisted him. The jungles devoured his men. Natives resisted with ferocity. His ships rotted, their timbers crawling with worms. His crews mutinied, cursing his name under the sweltering sun. At last, in Jamaica, his expedition collapsed. The caravels lay stranded, leaking and broken while his men starved, marooned on hostile shores. Columbus, once admiral of the ocean sea, now sat beneath tattered sails, writing desperate letters to Spain, begging for rescue. He had found the New World, but now it seemed determined to bury him. And as weeks turned into months and months into years, one truth grew sharper than the chains he had once worn. Christopher Columbus had been abandoned. The ship that finally bore him back to Spain creaked like a coffin at sea. Columbus stood on its deck, a man aged far beyond his years. His hair, once black as the ocean's depths, had turned white. His hands, once steady on the tiller, now trembled with sickness. He had crossed the Atlantic 4 times. He had given Spain a world, and yet he returned not as a hero but as a burden. When he set foot on Spanish soil, there were no bells, no crowds, no royal banners waiting. The man who had once paraded through Barcelona like a Caesar now arrived in silence. His enemies had claimed his victories. His rivals governed the colonies he had founded. And his titles, Admiral of the Ocean Sea, Viceroy of the Indies, were stripped from him, left as hollow echoes. He petitioned the court for justice. He demanded the promises once written in royal decrees. Wealth, honor, his governorship restored. He reminded Isabella of the vows she had made, of the gamble she had taken when the world laughed at him. But Isabella, weary and ill herself, could not answer with the same fire she once had. Ferdinand, colder still, looked past him, already planning Spain's empire without the troublesome Genoese. Columbus drifted through the corridors of power like a ghost, ignored by the courtiers who once fawned at his feet. To them he was not the discoverer of a new world. He was a relic, an old mariner, whose time had passed, whose stubbornness had cost Spain as much as it had given. In the quiet of his chambers, Columbus wrote furiously letters, pleas, bitter defenses of his name. He swore he had been wronged, betrayed, abandoned by the very crown he had served. His pen scratched across parchment, like a man trying to carve, his memory into stone before the world erased him. Illness gnawed at him. Arthritis bent his frame, fever clouded his mind. Yet even in pain he clung to his conviction that he had not stumbled upon islands, but reached the very fringes of Asia. He died, never knowing the truth, that the continent he found was a new world altogether, and that others would seize the glory for naming it. In 1506, in Valladolid, Christopher Columbus breathed his last. No crowds mourned. No trumpets sounded. The man who had crossed an ocean, who had torn open the gates of a new age, died almost alone, whispering still of voyages, of promises, of worlds beyond the horizon. He had found everything, and in the end he had lost it all. The chamber where Columbus died was silent, but outside the world he had unleashed thundered on. His death passed almost unnoticed in Spain, overshadowed by wars, by courts, by the endless hunger of empire. The man who had once stood before monarchs draped in banners of glory was lowered into the earth with scarcely a whisper. But the world could not forget what he had done. The voyages of Christopher Columbus had torn open the seas. In their wake came fleets of conquistadors, missionaries and merchants, bearing steel, fire, and the cross. The Caribbean, once lush with the laughter of the Taíno, fell silent as disease, slavery, and conquest devoured its people. Gold flowed into Spain, not in rivers but in torrents, feeding palaces, armies, and ambitions that would reshape Europe. Yet the Admiral himself had no share in it. His titles stripped, his riches denied. His heirs would spend generations in bitter lawsuits, fighting a crown that had used him, then cast him aside. Even the name of the world he had stumbled upon would not be his. It was another man, Amerigo Vespucci, whose letters captivated Europe and branded the new continents with his name, America. And so Columbus faded into a paradox. The man who found the New World, yet lost his claim to it. A visionary who crossed oceans, yet died believing he had reached Asia. A hero to some, a tyrant to others. His image twisted by centuries of myth and memory. Still the sea remembers. The crash of waves against the Caribbean shore echoes. The moment a sailor's cry shattered. The silence. Tierra, land. The palm trees still sway where he first planted his banner. The Atlantic winds still whisper of 3 small ships that dared to chase the impossible horizon. History would argue over him, condemn him, glorify him, curse him, praise him, but none could deny him. Columbus had changed the world, though it gave him nothing in return. In the end, perhaps that is the cruelest irony, the man who found a new world died with nothing but his stubborn dream. Abandoned by kings, forgotten by crowds, his name forever chained to both triumph and tragedy. The horizon he once stared into is still there, endless, mysterious, calling, and somewhere in that silence you can almost hear his voice, not of glory, not of gold, but of a man who dared to sail where no one else would. He found everything, and he lost it all. The horizon that Columbus once chased still calls to us today, reminding us of ambition, betrayal, and the price of chasing impossible dreams. If this journey gripped you, don't let it end here. Subscribe now and join us as we bring more hidden chapters of history to life. Until then, keep your eyes on the horizon.